Welcome back to the Chad Hasty Show, News Talk 95.1 FM and 790 AM KFYO. Much to get into in this final hour of the program. We start off by going to the phones, bringing on our good friend, Scott Braddock, editor of Quorum Report. Scott, good morning. How are you today?
Morning, Chad. I have a little bit of breaking news for you if you'd like to start with that.
Let's do.
Let's break it right here on the radio. It's just posted at quorumreport.com. The conservative, liberty, loving firebrand, Jonathan Stickland, will not seek re-election. He is retiring from the legislature. After passing his red light camera ban, I guess he figures he's done all there is to do.
Yeah, he's, this just literally coming out. He posted on his campaign Facebook page that he's done. That he doesn't want to be there forever. Now there are many people who are expecting this to be a very, very, very tough battle for his re-election campaign.
Yes.
That's as purple as you can get. His area. And what, Scott, when he won re-election this last time, wasn't it by just like under a point?
He was under 50%. Yeah, he was at 49%, and the story was that he went to bed on election night not knowing if he was going to eke out the victory. Didn't get much sleep, according to Representative Stickland. But interesting, from the standpoint of the changing, and we're going to talk more about the changing demographics of the state, but the changing political landscape in the Texas suburbs, which has for about a decade been the power base for, sort of the quote-unquote ultra-right-wing or most conservative members of the Texas legislature. At least that's the way they would describe themselves. It's been rock-solid Republican in the suburbs around Dallas-Fort Worth and around Houston. And, of course, the gentleman we're talking from is from Tarrant County, where Fort Worth is. But Williamson County, down here in the Austin area, also one of those places that was sort of, thought to be, not winnable for Democrats, just not the case, right? In the last election, in all those places, you either had Democrats winning their races or coming very close to winning races. And coming up in the next legislative cycle, in the next election cycle, especially in the Texas House, I would expect there to be very competitive races in that area, in northeast Tarrant County, where Stickland is from, and also in places like Collin County, Denton County, Fort Bend County, down in the Houston area, et cetera. What Stickland said on his Facebook page was that, he never meant to grow old in office. He says this isn't goodbye. It's just a new chapter for the Stickland family. I think it's also the beginning of a new chapter for Texas politics, as those suburbs have now become real battlegrounds for what's going to happen coming up in the next cycle. I mean, if you think about it, Chad, it was just inconceivable that Democrats would be winning in those places even 2 and 3 years ago, and now you're seeing some Republicans, Stickland being the first, say, I can't compete here anymore.
Yeah, I think this is very interesting. Did Stickland, in your opinion, show any signs at all during the session that this is going to be it for him?
I think throughout the session he had a little bit more of, he wouldn't have said it this way, but I think he tried to actually cooperate with folks. He did come in, to his credit, come into the session with his signature piece of legislation, had 100 co-sponsors. That was the ban on red light cameras. You don't get to 100 co-sponsors without trying to work with people, which, of course, was not what he had done previously. I think he wanted to be able to end this chapter and be able to say he actually did something in Austin. It was his, legacy, or it would have been his legacy, for previous sessions, going back to when he was first elected. I think in the 2012 cycle. Yeah, 2013 was his first session. It was always that he had never passed any bill ever, and he wore that as a badge of honor, a badge of pride. But going out, he wanted to be able to say that he had, gotten something done.
Visiting with Scott Braddock, editor, Quorum Report. There's so many questions coming to mind with Stickland because, look, he didn't have a lot of power in the Texas House, but he was one of the more interesting politicians, and it seemed as though, I've had him on the show, I've interviewed him, and it's one of those. No matter how you feel about the guy, everyone seemed to like him. When he was off the floor, at least, everyone kind of liked him. Scott, do you think because his area is going to be highly competitive, do you think he looked at it and went, there's no chance a firebrand like myself can win this thing? You know, maybe the Republicans can keep it if somebody more in a moderate tone runs. I mean, was this maybe maybe part of his thinking?
It may be that, or it may just be that he doesn't think a Republican can win in that area at all. I mean, if you think about what happened in 2018, you had Republicans almost losing in these places, or losing in these places, including in Williamson County, down here in the Austin area, which, again, Williamson County had been thought to be solidly Republican. It may be that no Republican can get there. The argument from Stickland and others, of course, has been that Republicans don't win unless they are as conservative as possible, and it doesn't matter which district they're running in. Of course, there are others in the Republican Party who would argue the opposite, of course, right, that you do need to have folks who are still conservative, but maybe not as extreme in their politics to win in some of these places. We'll find out, for the races where there are open seats, as there will be in this instance. You'll have a Republican primary, and the people in that community will decide, what kind of Republican they want to put forward going into what's going to be a presidential year instead of an off year like 2018 was. I mean, if you think about the turnout that we had in 2018, Chad, it really we've talked about it ad nauseum, but 8.4 million people voting in Texas. Those are presidential numbers. Yeah. What does that mean for next year? Does that mean that we've kind of topped out? And, you could argue it either way. It could be that we are going to see, turnout around the same levels, maybe around 9 million or something like that. I would expect something more than what we saw in 18. Or we could see 10 or 12 million people vote, or more than that. No one knows the answer. It's also interesting to note that Republicans, as we first reported at quorumreport.com during the legislative session, have been organizing and trying to figure out how to find more Republican voters. I was sort of on vacation last week, but I did give a speech to the Greater Houston Pachyderm Republican Club in Houston. I took, a couple hours off the beach to drive into Houston and talk to these Republicans, and I asked them about this. Have they ever seen the Speaker and the Lieutenant Governor and the Governor come together to try to find significant amounts of money, millions of dollars, for an effort to find and register new Republican voters, a big push to register new GOP voters in this state? And I'm talking to, a crowd of longtime Republican activists, and they're all shaking their head. They've never seen that. It's always Democrats, right, who are trying to go out and find new Democratic voters. And in 2018, all those new Democratic voters came out of the woodwork, right? They found a whole lot of them, right? Yeah. And so going into the next cycle, this new group that the Big Three were helping to raise money for, it's a group called Engage Texas. They've got a goal of finding 1 million new GOP voters in Texas, an unprecedented effort going into what may be an unprecedented battlefield.
Visiting with Scott Braddock, editor Quorum Report. You can go to quorumreport.com, see this Stickland story as it continues to develop. Scott, before we get into, and I'm going to ask you to hold on for one more segment so we can get into all the stuff that we were going to talk about. But I do want to ask you this before we move off the Stickland story for now. And that is, elephant in the room here, at least in the Texas House. Empower Texans just lost the biggest voice they still had left, in my opinion,
yes,
in the Texas House, and maybe even in the Senate, because they're a little bit upset even at the Lieutenant Governor right now. One thing that I kept hearing when I was in Austin, and even afterwards, by the way, and after the session, is that Empower Texans, while they are still a group people are paying attention to, their influence is waning. Now with Stickland, who was kind of carrying the sword for those guys, do they? What happens with Empower Texans now and their influence in the Texas House?
The real question is going to be how much money are they going to have to spend in these elections? They have made a lot of noise. They have been questioning the Lieutenant Governor, as you said. They have been questioning other Republicans, including the new Speaker of the House, Dennis Bonnen, who, by the way, they were against in his primary election in the last cycle, so that was not new. And by the way, we should also say, Stickland, after Connie Burton, who was defeated in the 2018 election on the Senate side, Stickland was their, the largest beneficiary of their largesse. You know, they've given him a lot of money, to run for state house. And when he left the Freedom Caucus in the Texas House, it wasn't because he had suddenly become more moderate and they were too right-wing. It was, you had to flip that. It was that they were not extreme enough for the Empower Texans crowd, which had even started to criticize the Freedom Caucus. So what is their influence going forward? That'll depend on whether they have resources, and we'll find out, by the way, coming up in campaign finance reports. We'll at least get to see some of the numbers as far as how much money they're going to have to spend in the next cycle. And if they are able to elect some new champions, then maybe they'll continue to have influence. But if not, then I think we are moving into a new chapter in Texas politics.
Very interesting. All right, Scott, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll get into everything we were going to get into originally with you. Scott Braddock, editor, Quorum Report, Chad Hasty Show here on KFYO. All right, Chad Hasty Show, KFYO. Scott Braddock, editor of Quorum Report, joining us. Even when breaking news happens, he's on the Chad Hasty Show. Scott, thanks again for joining us today. I guess we can get into some of the other news that we were going to get into. This is the first week. I know you're excited. Everyone is about the debates for the Democrats, and that includes 2 Texas Democrats who are actually going to be part of the presidential debates.
You have Julian Castro, you have Beto O'Rourke, and the question is whether it's do or die time for these guys. I've heard a lot of folks chattering about that. Beto came in with a roar, and he's been, more whimpering over the last, few months as his campaign has dragged on. And, of course, you have Castro, who has yet to make, huge waves in this race. I was looking at some of the polling, data, and neither of them, is very high in the polls. Of course, O'Rourke doing better than Castro. He is, has been up and down, of course, around. I think O'Rourke at one point was up to like 12%, but he's fallen back down to 3.6 in the latest Real Clear Politics poll averages. But look, you've got how many people running now as Democrats? 365,000. And so, how are they going to get all those people on the stages? No, they've got I guess you got to cut the DNC a little bit of slack here because they're trying to figure out how to manage this with so many candidates. It was bad enough for Republicans in 2016 when it was 16 candidates. And, of course, we all knew that President Trump was going to be the one to rise above all of them and become president, right? Everybody predicted that.
Absolutely.
We all knew that. I hope there are no tapes of me from that time talking about the presidential race. But, look, you have a crowded field, and I would say it's maybe not do or die time for these guys. It might be tempting to think they really need to swing for the fences and try to get noticed here. But when you have these initial debates, there are going to be so many people. It's two debates over 2 nights, right? Because they have to divide these people up. I would think that they would want to, maybe more play it safe and just not get knocked out. Because what does happen in these early rounds when you have a crowded field is it's more like Survivor, and you don't want to get voted off the island. You don't want to have your oops moment. So, have yourself ready to go. Be well prepared. Try to be memorable, but not too memorable. Coming out of these first debates. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think for Julian Castro in particular, I think he's got no pressure on him because there's nowhere to go but up for Julian Castro. I mean, there's nowhere to go but up. And for Beto O'Rourke, I think for Beto, he has a little bit more pressure because I think he's on night 1, correct?
Yeah.
Is he on night 1? So
he's on night 1 and up against Elizabeth Warren, which I think you pointed out interesting that she and they did this in an interesting way. They kind of mixed it up, and it wasn't just those that are highest in the polls all on stage together, and then all the also-rans on another stage. They're not doing it that way. But interesting that Warren is not going to be alongside the next night of folks who are more upper tier in this race. So people don't really get. Folks who are Democrats are going to have to watch both of these debates to really kick the tires on all of the candidates who are being taken seriously at this point.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think for Beto, he's got a little bit more pressure on himself because he doesn't have to face really any strong opposition except for Elizabeth Warren. And if he can come across as somewhat, somewhat okay in these debates. I don't think he was that great in the debate with Ted Cruz. If he can show improvement, if he can show that he knows what he's talking about, it could help him in the polls. I think for Julian, he's just going to get lost in the crowd.
I think that may be correct. I think that the debates are not going to, at least this point, not going to be as critical as some folks might think. I would give credit to Castro for going on Fox News Channel, for example, which is seen as hostile territory to Democrats. I thought he did pretty well, and is a way to really stand out because he had that national stage to all to himself for an hour, and actually did pretty well under the Fox News. I would say did well under the Fox News Channel questioning. I'm not sure why all the other Democrats are afraid to go there. But a bunch of them certainly seem to be.
Yeah, absolutely. We got a couple of minutes left here, Scott. Let's talk about an observation that you had over the weekend. Senator John Cornyn tweeting out a news story and got blasted for just stating out a fact, basically the headline of the story.
The headline of the story, which I don't think should be controversial, although over the years, of course, demographic shifts are always followed by controversy. In this state, more Hispanics are, added every year than white people. I mean, that's what the headline is from the Texas Tribune. Texas gained almost 9 Hispanic residents for every additional white resident last year. I'm going to go out on a limb and say the people at the Texas Tribune are not right-wing lunatics, Chad.
Right.
But those are the exact words, that headline, the exact words that Cornyn tweeted out, and I thought was just meant to be informational. By the way, one of the guys over at the Tribune, let me know that whenever you're looking at one of their stories, if you click the button that says tweet this out, it'll just tweet the headline, which apparently is exactly what he did, right?
Yes.
So that'll teach him to use their website. But I do think the backlash to this, people were saying he's being tone deaf, there's no context to this, he's not saying enough about the children who are being detained along the border and all of that. This is social media at its best in 2019, Chad, where people are very angry at somebody for tweeting out what is just objectively a fact. It was a lot of liberals who were very angry about this and making, lobbing the criticisms that I just mentioned. But I also saw some, on the right who were coming after Cornyn on this as well and saying, this is this kind of thing, him talking about Hispanics. That's why we need somebody who's a real conservative to get in there and challenge him in the primary. One of the things I think it underscores about Senator Cornyn as he goes into his reelection effort for 2020, as you've pointed out, he doesn't have the same kind of base that Ted Cruz does. Cornyn is one of those who's exposed on both his right and left flanks. And so I'm interested to see, moving forward, how his campaign manages all this. It seems like, at least so far, messaging-wise, he's not always right in lockstep with the president, but does vote with the president. He's in Republican leadership, of course. And when you look at the messaging, it seems like so far from his campaign, they're not putting much daylight between him and the president, almost as if they're going to sink or swim together next year on the ballot in 2020.
Yeah, absolutely. And Trump did endorse him. So, Scott, real quick, tell folks what they can find at Quorum Report.
Well, we'll have the fallout from this Stickland announcement for sure at quorumreport.com, and everything happening with your state government. We'll keep up with what's happening with these Texans running for president as well, and we'll send you those breaking news emails. You'd know about it first, either here on KFYO or in your email box by signing up for the free emails at quorumreport.com.
Very good, Scott. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chad.
That's Scott Braddock, our good friend over at quorumreport.com.